Have you ever wondered what it was like playing the big short for real? In this episode of Bitcoin for Millennials, I talk with Pius Sprenger. He's a Wall Street insider who has lived through this all. And now, as Bitcoin's adoption is growing, backed by math and physics, Pius says a 1 million price tag is coming and it won't cause any chaos. Bitcoin is playing a crucial role in the transformation of the financial system, and this high signal conversation with Pius will open your eyes as to where finance and Bitcoin are truly headed next. All right, let's dive in. Yeah, I'm happy we're talking again. We've had some interesting calls before talking about Bitcoin. Obviously, you've had a big career on Wall Street. You are also a mathematician. And I just want to ask you, like, how did those two come together? Like, what drew you to a career on Wall Street initially?
Well, that's, as you pointed out, it's a very unusual move from mathematician to become a Wall Street trader, as I did. The reason was very simple. I was always intrigued by math and physics since I'm a little kid. I studied math and my minor physics, and then I did my PhD in mathematics. First, I did my diploma in pure math, algebraic topology, and then I did my my PhD in something called nonlinear dynamics and calculus variations, so which I enjoyed very much. But when you do mathematics, you realize one thing: you can be a very good guy and a good mathematician, but then you meet people who they're not just a bit better than you; they're so much better than you. And that's I think you have to recognize that, to say, well, I could work 24/7 all my life, and this guy could do it within like a few weeks, maybe even days. So, and that was the frustrating side for me, to recognize something which I really love. I was pretty good at it, but other people are just so much better. So okay, I enjoyed it. It was a young people's game, so I decided to do something else. And by pure luck, I ended up in the 90s then, back then, 97, at an investment bank that just started in Germany, a Deutsche Bank back then, Deutsche Bank Grenfell. And that fits actually now to the Bitcoin story. What happened in the 90s in the investment banking world, trading world, there was a bit like the atmosphere of the fintech atmosphere today. So the introduction of derivatives came to capital markets. And so Wall Street believed that they had to hire very technical mathematician, astrophysicists, chemistry experts, and so on, in order to calculate this very complicated math and to come up with new models in order to have an edge versus another trading house, and so on. So that was the idea. In order actually to be successful in derivatives, you needed to have what we call nowadays quants. And so I was hired as a quant guy, as a quantitative trader structure. And from that, then I moved rather quickly to London, because the world back then was always obvious to me. Germany is very useless when it comes to finance, banking, and bankers. So it's a third world country when it came to that. So the hub is obviously back then London and New York. So I moved to London, worked in for Morgan Stanley for a while, and then jumped ship again, worked for Lehman Brothers, and then got rehired back to Deutsche. And that pretty much then when the whole saga started in 2004-05, where I realized, thanks to my boss, Craig Lippman, and some people might know the name, everybody who watched the movie The Big Short knows this good-looking guy, Ryan Gosling, and he actually plays my boss, Craig Lippman, back then.
And he was the biggest advocate for the scam, right? That he discovered, basically the subprime mortgages. That he was the guy shopping around trying to find people to get in on this trade.
Absolutely, because back then when I got into, I did some other derivative stuff and markets. I did corporate credit and some other stuff. And then when I rejoined Deutsche Bank, I said, actually, I want to get involved in the securitization market, the asset-backed securities. And the niche market of that was really a tiny market, was the subprime market, the subprime mortgage market. And my boss was Craig Lipman. Now, my job was to introduce derivatives to this cash market. It was a very old-fashioned market run by typical guys who buy and sell and cash guys, not really very quantitative traders, except my boss, Greg, was a very switched on guy. So actually, he taught me everything about the subprime market, and I sort of taught him something about how derivatives desks should be set up in order to run an efficient strategy here. And it became very quickly clear to me that to say, well, that's a bit of a weird market, because these are loans given to people with hardly make any money, and all these people own actually houses, and now we bundle it together, tranche it up, and create out of shit AAA. And I kept on doing that. Now we are in the middle as traders. We buy and sell, so we are not supposed to have opinions. But what we did, we went out there in 2005 and actually told investors, listen, everybody wants to go long. Everybody wants to own this asset. We said, that's fine. We offer that. But you should consider as well to short it, because maybe there's massive risk involved. They laughed at us. So we are dummies. They said, what do you guys know? And the intriguing thing about our trade was the following of the derivatives trade. There were some people in the market believing that the housing market is at a height and there's a bit of a bubble territory. So they want to short that, but that didn't have the right instrument. And so we offered an instrument, which I developed with Craig, which allowed them to short the market without losing a lot if they are wrong. Now, it took us a while. Most people really didn't take us seriously. And I remember whenever I presented this trade on the short side, people left the room and were not interested. And they were gathering in the other room where they say, oh, I have the better bond than you have. And it's crazy. So therefore, we were very early, and that can be wrong, can be bad as well, because when you're very early in a trade, but the market moves against you, management gets a bit itchy. So it was not an easy trade. And then fast forward 2007, the market finally collapsed. It was banks 2007-8 went under, and these were the best years for me. It was great. We made tons of money. But now it's interesting as well, and that really weaves into the Bitcoin story. Craig and I and the whole trading desk, we were excited to say we were right. All the other idiots got it wrong. We made so much money, and to customer, we actually showed the trade. They even made more money than we did. But at some point you realize, Bram, if you're on a plane in 35,000 feet and you win a big game, but nevertheless the plane goes down, you're dead as well. So that was the moment, and that was the trade which is described in the Big Short towards the end against Morgan Stanley, a firm I used to work for a couple of years earlier, where pretty much the bet was the following. Morgan Stanley took the long position to say, oh, everything's going to be fine, on a $3 billion portfolio. That's public knowledge. And for that, and we took the other side. We say, okay, we think there's a risky trade. And these were the smartest of smart traders, Morgan Stanley. And we say, okay, we pay you around 6 million of premium, like an insurance premium every year. And if there are defaults, you have to pay us. Fast forward, Morgan Stanley lost almost 2.9 billion, no, more than 2.9 billion against us. They had to pay cash. And we had to pay a premium of 12 million. So it was, I think, the best trade Deutsche Bank ever had in history since its 150 years existence. But so we were, of course, we're like, oh, that's great. We're so good. We're going to be making so much money. And then suddenly you realize, hold on. If they have a 3 billion problem, and if all the other guys have the problems which we could see, it doesn't matter. We're all screwed. We're all finished.
Bitcoin custody is evolving, and OnRamp is leading this change with multi-institution custody, eliminating single points of failure. Instead of relying on one institution, OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a cold storage multi-sig vault backed by 3 independent custodians, where no single party can move your funds alone, providing an unprecedented level of security. Your assets are protected by a 100 million Lloyd's of London insurance policy, with all transactions fully auditable on-chain and only executed at your direction. This means complete transparency and control over your assets at all time. Beyond custody, OnRamp provides comprehensive Bitcoin services that include trading, lending, inheritance planning, and IRAs. You can view them as your private Bitcoin banking partner tailored to your wealth preservation goals. Whether you're new to Bitcoin or an experienced holder, OnRamp's approach helps you secure your generational wealth with unmatched security and peace of mind. You can sign up at onrampbitcoin.com and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, to receive $150 in Bitcoin after your first deposit. If you first want to learn more, you can also book a free consultation via their website to speak with one of their Bitcoin custody experts. Tell them you came through me, and they'll take extra good care of you. My American friends, I've got something for you. If you're into Bitcoin, you want to grow your stack in any way possible. What if you could do it effortlessly just by spending your fiat? The Gemini Bitcoin credit card is designed to help you do just that by giving you instant Bitcoin rewards on every purchase. Just use it like any other credit card and earn back up to 4% on transportation, 3% on dining, 2% on groceries, and 1% on everything else. There are no annual fees for this card and no exchange fees to receive your Bitcoin rewards. Sign up to get your limited edition Bitcoin Orange credit card and earn a $200 Bitcoin bonus when you spend $3,000 in the first 90 days. You can find more information and terms in the description below, or go to gemini.com/Bram to sign up today and start stacking effortlessly. That's gemini.com/Bram.
But what I learned, and that really fits very well into the crypto, in the Bitcoin story, was it pays out to be on the other side, and to have actually to pay a bit of money. But if you're right, you're going to make a lot of money. I think that's usually a very good strategy, to be on the other side of whatever, of like Main Street, in this case, of like the main traders, the smartest people, because now actually it's very cheap to say, okay, maybe I don't understand, maybe I'm a dummy, but I'm willing to take the other side after doing my little naive homework. And the homework was, again, it was not really rocket science at all. Like, you just had to look at it in a very simple way. And I think my advantage, which I brought to the table, was I knew nothing about subprime when I started. I knew nothing. And because with my fresh pairs of eyes, I said, that doesn't make any sense. And Craig, of course, he taught me that. So yes, this is like, he said, it's all the same shit, Pius. But he was the only voice. And now you talk to all the other guys who give you 5,000 reasons. And, oh, Pius, have you ever read the document on a subprime bond? Which is 600 pages. This reads like, it's unbelievable. Like, no, I never read 600 pages of this crap, and I'm never gonna read, and I don't have to read. It's all the same crap. Now, people made fun of me. Craig was in the market for a long time, which I think was huge, because the guy was in the market for many years, but still was able to think outside of the box. That actually is very powerful. I was more coming from outside of the box to say, this is strange. No, and that turned out to be a great trade. And that's then, so that was my Wall Street career. And then in 2009, I took over the whole trading area for subprime mortgage trading, moved to New York. Craig Lipman started his own, I pretty much replaced my boss, Craig Lipman, who started his own hedge fund. And then in 2012-13, I was asked by management to run the bad bank of Deutsche Bank. So I sold the Cosmopolitan Casino. Somehow I'm like in this gambling thing, so I had to sell that. I had to sell banks and clean up balance sheets. And during that time, then I stumbled into, by pure luck, into the Bitcoin world.
Yeah, awesome. I think this is amazing to hear this history. What I really take away from it is this counter thinking, in a sense, right? Which also when you say like it wasn't really that difficult, that's kind of how I feel about the Bitcoin trade, right? Like I mean, we are not really paying a premium perhaps each month to keep this trade alive. By the way, I love that part about the Big Short movie, right, where Michael Burry has to defend the fact that he's paying I don't know, $90 million premium each year or something to keep that trade going, right? And then he's met with a lot of skepticism. I think what we're paying is a certain social cost, right? Like people think you're crazy or that you're advocating for the collapse of the fiat money system, right? Or also just the volatility through this monetization of Bitcoin, right? Like it's hodling Bitcoin is very hard. I think just understanding it is hard, but actually holding on to it through the ups and downs and through this whole phase that Bitcoin is going through, I think that's the cost that we are paying. But in essence, I feel exactly the same. I don't have a finance or an economics background. I just look at the money system and like all these things that I could do in the money system, and I look at what Bitcoin is objectively, and I just think like, yeah, no, that's the better thing to own. Like I don't really have to understand like the super intricate details of the fiat money system just to create a certain thesis for myself that this is the thing that I'm focusing on, right? Like I also don't think it is that deep. So I find that interesting resemblance in that sense. But yeah, so you saw everything within the great financial crisis. Of course, Bitcoin came out at the peak of that. Do you remember your first encounter with Bitcoin and what initially made you skeptical or curious about it? Because obviously you understand the problem. You were basically part of the problem, right?
Sort of.
And I wonder, by the way, if you agree if the great financial crisis was ever fixed, or that we still live in that, right? So you have all this like broad experience and a certain point of view on it. Like, were you curious initially when you discovered it, or just skeptical like a lot of traditional
I wasn't
people?
skeptical, and the guy who introduced me to it was a person I met. I still remember that vividly. I can say it was June 20th, 2012. And I met him actually in Europe. I flew from New York to Europe, and was a friend of a family, a friend of us. And this guy was much younger than I am, like almost 20 years younger. And he was, I think, sort of like a semi-professional poker player. And back then, of course, when you are like in poker playing, then you that's where, interesting again, like it's this playing part that people say, how can we pay online? And so in the poker scene, I learned apparently it was Bitcoin. People talk about Bitcoin. So he got involved in a Bitcoin trade very early on. And we spent a weekend together talking about a lot of things, banking. And I was very interested in the guy. He was an extremely smart man. And so he said, Pius, there's Bitcoin. And so he explained it to me, and he turned out to be a successful entrepreneur, extremely successful. And I invested then in his platform, which I think is a tremendous platform now in the crypto space, not just Bitcoin. So that was my first encounter with Bitcoin. But I didn't really pay too much attention. And then 2013, 14, I started reading the white paper. I'm a math guy. I like the cryptographic background quite a lot. So I read the 7-8 pages and I said, okay, but I didn't really grasp the deeper meaning of that, because so like to really understand what problem did he solve, I got it, like, okay, peer-to-peer, now trust. But somehow when you still come out of my world, like, what's wrong here? We transact with each other, so it seems to be working just fine. And then actually it actually was Wall Street again where I paid more attention, because on trading floor in New York, behind me were like the foreign exchange traders. Mm-hmm. And for their personal account, we're talking about 13, 14 area, Bitcoin was, I think, between $300 to $700 back and forth. And these guys just traded at like soybean futures. Like, what the hell is that? Because they didn't need approval for trading Bitcoin, and somehow they made markets and not for clients, for themselves. And okay, that seems to be interesting. It seems to be a really, really volatile asset. And as a trader, you want to have an asset where you stand in the middle, which is very volatile, because you're always going to make money. And in 2015-16, then I invested actually in this platform of this young gentleman, an Austrian platform, which actually is a brokerage for back then Bitcoin, now for all sort of like coins. And the initial idea was not like I'm so convinced by Bitcoin. It was more my trader view. It seems to be a very volatile asset, so it's very safe to be in the middle. Even if Bitcoin goes to zero or it goes up a lot, you always make money. I love that. If it goes to zero, then clearly business doesn't exist anymore. It wouldn't be that great. And it took me then a while, actually quite a while, before I actually Bitcoin on its own. It's the interesting part. So I spent much more time than really going down that, what we call the rabbit hole. So I think so it was like, coming from a different side, I think, than most other people. It's more like from the Wall Street thinking, trader, investing in a platform like that. And you say, well, actually, now you have all the other tokens and the NFT, the altcoins. And then whoa, it's a bit reminded me of Wall Street to say, no, you come up with all this crappy stuff out there, and some might make sense, some might not. I don't know, but some is like, really? Do you really need this NFT? What even actually is it? And so I the really real asset here is Bitcoin. So that's how I finally came back and said, well, that's the asset to own. I think that was my journey now for quite a while, and. Regarding your other question, a financial crisis. Did Wall Street, did we solve that? No, I think, and that's very important. Without the great financial crisis, that's my hypothesis. Maybe I'm wrong. Bitcoin wouldn't exist today in the shape, in a form we have it, because we never solved the great financial crisis. In 2008-9, as I said, it was a great time for me financially. But banks needed bailout. And my view was, and management didn't like that we all should go bust. We screwed it up. We should own up to our mistakes and just let the banks default. Nobody cares. The water is still flowing, electricity is still coming, and the system still works. Whether they're investment bankers and traders like me around or not, doesn't matter. But of course, they play a different game. I was a bit naive. So they never really solved the issue. Actually, what they did, they put the interest rate down to almost zero, actually in Europe to zero. So they screwed actually everybody who was a saver, who actually was careful, who want to save for later days. And they actually benefited people who had assets and gambled. And I think Bitcoin, the price of Bitcoin, it was, I think the first mining block was January 3rd, 2009, so right at the end of the financial crisis. The price of Bitcoin, in my view, reflects the uncertainty what people feel, their gut feel about the state of the world, the financial affairs. If everything had been sorted out, if people say, well, it's a stable system, it's not full of debt, I was a debt trader, then I think Bitcoin would trade at like $1, $2, $3. It's would be funny money. But I think the fact that the financial crisis has not been sorted out, and it should create even a potential bigger crisis now on a much higher scale, that's reflected in the price of Bitcoin.
I'm thinking about the word speculation, right? Because sometimes people say oh, Bitcoin, that is just pure speculation, etc. And I think you're the best person to ask, isn't everything speculation? That's always my answer, right? If you invest in Tesla, you speculate that Elon wakes up in the morning. Or if you invest in Apple, you speculate that Tim Cook wakes up in the morning. Or China, the factories in China still run. Everything you do financially or just in general in life, I would say it's speculation. Doing nothing is also speculation, right? So it's
absolutely.
So it's like a non-argument, I would say, when people say Bitcoin is speculation. But connecting speculating on Bitcoin being the best money, the best store of value, how would you kind of talk through that thesis for people? Or like, how is it for you? How did you switch from working in finance, playing with money, maybe not necessarily even understanding what money is, to then actually, getting triggered or motivated or getting the certain type of curiosity to go down this rabbit hole to actually see, hey, there is this other thing that's brewing, and now they're like standing next to each other, and you switched basically.
Yes, absolutely. And actually, as I said, I was working on Wall Street for many, many years, decades, but I never really understood money. And I was a debt trader. I traded debt instruments from the morning to the evening. So actually, I made my career trading with debt, which is crazy actually when you think about that. And my parents are farmers, southern part of Germany. So unfortunately, they're not alive anymore. But I recall my mother, and she asked me once, I started working in the bank. So what are you doing, Pius? I'm like, well, I'm trading this debt instrument. And she looked at me. She's like a farmer woman from a very small, tiny farm. I said, I'm trading that. And I said, how does it work? You made money with debt. It was actually really simple. So like the question was so simple. And that's often, again, you get from people, you think, oh, she doesn't understand. And I think back then I must have said exactly that. Oh, you don't understand. It's like the whole thing. And like,
that is very important.
I think she understood much more than I ever did.
Yeah.
She had clear eyes. She had blue eyes. She understood things very well. And I'm actually the dummy. But I didn't know back then. So I found the question actually a very deep question. And I thought, she, not really, how would she know? My mother, I love her, but growing up, doing farmer's work, what does she know? So let's be a bit the arrogance. And I think Bitcoin taught me really what money is and what it isn't. And somehow you think first principle, because we assume money is always somehow related to governments, states. And it's almost like when you think yourself, you are born before the time of enlightenment in medieval times in Europe. You're born in Holland or like somewhere in France, and you just in Italy anyway, and you just assume you're a product of God, of Christ, and somehow this is your life. So, and then the state and church is one thing. That's your life. And it was actually the enlightenment and actually the progress of Europe, which made all of us very wealthy. Like it's a culture and science that we say, no, there's a big difference between state and religion. And religion is great, and be faithful is wonderful, and to believe in something, I think can be very important and is important. But to say, no, it's separate. Here's my life and here's my faith and my religion. Money and state, bizarrely, and again, Bitcoin taught me that. I never thought about it. Actually, it's one. And now we take it for a given. As a central bank, it's somehow interlinked. Bitcoin is the first thing. Gold, you could argue, but it's not really ideal for as a money to serve as money, as a medium of exchange. Yeah, first time a product in a financial system which separates state and money. It's a bit like separating church and state, and therefore I think it's a very big idea. It's potentially it's a massive idea. And I think back then, 400 or 500 years ago, people hardly understood what it means to separate state and church. Yeah. And I think today only a few people might, and even like I don't understand fully what it means to separate state and money. And I think that most people on Wall Street and even central bankers until today have not understood it yet, what actually it means.
If you want to self-custody your Bitcoin stack, I recommend the Blockstream Jade Plus. I've been using this premium Bitcoin-only hardware wallet for a few months now, and I love its design and ease of use. What makes it stand out is its open source hardware and software, and Blockstream's unique genuine check, which makes sure that your device is authentic. No backdoors or compromises. You can connect with the Jade Plus however you want, Bluetooth, USB-C, or you can go fully air-gapped with its built-in camera for cable-free QR transactions. The metal case feels solid and the color screen is easy to read, and it connects with your favorite Bitcoin apps like Blockstream Green, Sparrow, and Electrum. Get your Jade Plus today at store.blockstream.com and use code BRAM to get 10% of your entire order. Let's talk about something that not a lot of people think about before it's too late. Where are you storing your Bitcoin seed words? Are they truly secure? I found my solution with Stampseed. It's an elegant all-in-one titanium plate solution with no separate pieces to lose or manage. Your seed phrase gets permanently stamped into pure titanium that withstands fire, survives water, and lasts for generations. Unlike shallow etching methods, Stampseed's patented tools help you to deeply stamp every letter for permanent readability, protecting your financial legacy. When you order a titanium seed plate from Stampseed, you can also upload a custom design or your logo to customize the back of your plate to make it fully personalized. Paper seed phrases are a disaster waiting to happen. Secure your Bitcoin with Stampseed for decades to come. Visit stampseed.com and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, to get 15% off your order. Again, the mirror with Bitcoin is more that it is inherently transparent. Like, no one has to believe us talking about Bitcoin. Like, you can verify that for yourself, like how it works and where the value is then actually derived from, and people could get to that conclusion from different points of views, right? From whatever background they have or whatever they find interesting.
Yeah, I think you make a very important point. People think that have a feeling what money is because they can here I have it because I have money, of course, as well a bit because I believe that they have something like that. There's something real, which is it's just paper. It's not even pretty one, by the way.
And you can vote on that, by the way, what it looks like.
Yeah. So so people believe that's a real thing. Not understanding, and I spend a bit of time to think about central banks, to say there's a massive process running around by unelected bureaucrats. We happen to know in Europe, Christine Lagarde or Sharon Powell in the United States happen. These are like people, by the way, neither you nor I have ever voted for, ever. By the way, Christine Lagarde, last time I checked, she never even had a background in finance. She's like a career.
Oh, really? I never looked at it. Really?
I think she's a lawyer. Last time I checked. Huh. So she's she's not a financial person, and I think hardly anybody is. But somehow you end up on top of this organization, and now you have control. But it's even more evil than that. It doesn't just allow governments to have full control over people with inflation and then imposing tax on it and printing more of it when you want. And I'll say something to that in a second. I think it's as well very critical, and there's a reason why Nixon went off the gold standard in 1971. Because war. If you think of the First World War, which Europe got dragged into, thanks like to the Germans couldn't help themselves. If that had been on pure gold standard, this war would have been over within a few months. But now people started getting like printing money and doing more of that. You can prolong wars. A lot of people die. It's a very bad situation. Mm-hmm. If you don't have that, if you say, well, actually, what's my gold vault? It's empty. There's nothing behind anymore. The souls are going to say, listen, it's not gonna, why would I serve you? Because you cannot even pay me. Now I die and you're the state. You should look after me, but you're bankrupt. And I think people confuse that. And therefore, if you have proper money, and Bitcoin is, gold definitely has tremendous value as well. It's actually peace. It means peace is a peaceful world, in my view, because you cannot go crazy and massive wars and to impose power over other people. And I think that's and everybody, and that's a great thing as well. If you have Bitcoin, it gives you self freedom. That's, I think, is a great thing. If you go to a bank, Bram, tomorrow and ask for €3,000, I don't know how it's in Holland.
But
They might ask questions and to say, yes. Well, why do you need actually €3,000? And like that's already to ask a question tells you these are not your €3,000. They don't belong to you. You think it's a game and it's a mind game. They belong to somebody else.
Yeah.
And I think that's people don't understand. With Bitcoin now, you own it. They cannot do anything with it. They can say, listen, give us the Bitcoin. No, I'm not giving you my seed phrase. I've forgotten the seed phrase. What are you going to do? And I think there's a very powerful, it's a very actually message as well, where one thing I learned being a capitalist, you need resources, you need money. And in the old days, people without money, like they were easy to control. But nowadays, if you have suddenly money, which is independent from states and governments, you are free. And I think that is one of the very, very powerful messages.
Yeah.
When it comes to Bitcoin.
This is why I find Bitcoin so infinitely interesting. I would say this. To go back to what we talked about, it's not rocket science. Like if you call the bank and you want that money and they start asking questions, legally by definition it is not yours, right? It's a claim. It's an IOU. That's what you sign for when you sign the contract with the bank. Just that someone teaching me that really opened my eyes, right? And I think that is a signal that people can act upon, but it's. I don't know. I think it feels so when you really realize that, like, I felt betrayed in a sense, right? And I think people don't want to feel that, so they also don't really go there in their mind to just think about like, oh, how does this work, etc. Until you're kind of perhaps confronted with that in whatever way, right? And so this is what. I think two things. So one thing, what you talked about with the war, right? This is also what Saif Dinamus talks about in one of his books. Like if you have a finite amount of men, a finite amount of material, a finite amount of gold, for example, to finance this battle. At one point, when you had these standing armies, if one army had like the upper hand over the other, the losing part would already send a person to draft some sort of agreement, because they couldn't fight until everyone was dead, because then they wouldn't even be able to defend whatever they won, maybe even, right? Because they didn't even have people and material anymore. So because of this scarcity, they were actually forced to make conscious decisions about who to even go to war with, and B, how far to take that battle, right? But when you can create infinite money, air quotes, to pay people nominally again, then you can just have an endless war, which is profitable for many people that, for example, supply the supplies and material and
the industrial war complex. That's how they call it in the United States. It's a big, it's a big industry, and you need wars because people build massive amounts of weapons factories and have old weapons. Now suddenly you need a war, because otherwise they're going to rot, because they're going to be new technology, and you don't want to write it down on balance sheets to say, oh, let's have some more. And people think that's crazy conspiracy theory, but actually, again, it's pure rational human behavior, because humans want to make money. It's
like a new iPhone in that sense, right? Like I have a new drone. Before I buy like the new drones, I have to spend all the other missiles I had before, because the drone is. I agree. Like it's not a nice topic to talk about, but eventually, I would say it's very simplistic and logical, and this is just an industry.
You've seen this very sad war what we have right now going on between Ukraine and Russia, and when it started in 2022 in February, I assumed. Like I hate wars. So like really, I find it really. I don't understand how anybody can defend sort of like aggressive behavior on either side. By the way. And I looked at it like, this is strange. In 2022, the war is being fought in the beginning as if it's like 1939 or even before, with tractors and tanks and like, this is old stuff. And of course, now we see, and we know anyway, they have drones, they have cyber attacks, they have everything. But of course, let's get rid of the old stuff first, because there's a lot of things have been built, and I think that's otherwise like it doesn't make any sense to fight wars like that in 2022. And now, of course, you can see they introduce more modern weapons and new technology. And as I said, I think Bitcoin would actually, on that one, any sound money which is separated from state and government, would actually just disallow this type of evil events like wars, which just kill people. There's nothing good about that.
Yeah.
But somehow it's I think here as well, it's always very difficult when coming back to Bitcoin to convince people. I think you said it perfectly. There's somehow they don't want to admit that they have been wrong for so long, because it comes across as a lie. You lied to yourself, you lied to your kids. No, I'm an older guy, and when I sort of like speak to people and I speak to them about Bitcoin, I think I'm crazy. Now, on the other hand, they really don't think it, because they're like, oh, Pius had a career, so like he knows one or two things about banking and finance, and he worked very senior there as well in banks. So maybe he knows a bit more than a regular banker should know. So that scares them, actually. A guy like me saying, this is a real thing, and what you believe is real, forget it. It's actually harmful, and therefore they don't like the fact that banker turns suddenly a Bitcoiner or is doing that.
Well, this is exactly the other thing I wanted to say is this is what Jeff Booth talks about, right? There's a certain paradigm, like there are certain things you think you know or were taught to you that help you to make like sense of the world, or in this context, money and banking, finance, and how the money flows, etc. And people look from this paradigm they have towards this other thing that's emerging, and they're putting all the things they use to create structure from their paradigm to make a structure in this new paradigm. But as we talked about, Bitcoin is the total opposite of the current paradigm. So it's also really hard to see it, right? That's why people say like, oh, it's speculation, whatever. Like again, that is not that is a non argument, right? Or like it's very risky. And this is something that I wanted to ask you too. Like, oh, Bitcoin is risky and it's new and it's volatile and yada yada. You have structured massive trades. You have run bad bank operations. How would you compare the risks in TradFi, maybe the risks today, 2025, and compare that with Bitcoin? What is risk, or like how would you talk through that?
I think I would compare it a bit with when you get on a plane. When you to get on a plane, you go on the runway, it's very shaky. You can feel it's very shaky. That's the beginning. Then let's assume it's not wonderful weather. There's a bit turbulence out there. There's maybe a bit of thunderstorm. So you go up, and now it's like left and right, and you got a bit like, oh, I don't like that. And now you go through the massive close, so it's getting really bumpy. And now you can look around, like people are a bit scared, some are cool. And then suddenly you finally dive through the last part of the cloud, and you see the wonderful blue sky, and it turns to be very calm. And you realize, wow, this is actually feels safe, feels good, and great. And when you're once up there, and by the way, I don't really enjoy always necessarily flying, but when you're up there, then you don't even want to go there anymore. You say, well, a wonderful blue sky, it's peaceful. So I think that's the way I would look at the risk. So just to come back now to Earth again, in terms of risk, when Bitcoin was at $1, at $10, moving up to 20, 30, and then collapsing again down to 22, I think that was risky. Absolutely risky. Anything could have happened. And just a tiny event could have put this whole thing to zero. But at 10,000, there's already less risk involved. At 100,000, obviously, I think, there's really, the risk is quite little. And I think the higher we climb and the less risky it becomes. I think that's the way I see it. Point one. Point two, and now comes my math hat in. And I found that a while ago, like 1.5, almost 2 years ago, actually. There's this gentleman, called Giovanni. And he introduced the idea of power law. And I read it and well, that reminds me when I did my math PhD many, many moons ago. So therefore, nowadays, I wouldn't describe myself as a mathematician anymore. You see, I'm not practicing. I wouldn't understand my own work. So I think it would be arrogant to say I'm a mathematician. Now, people are doing math, they're a mathematician. So I was once one, but not anymore. So I now let's check that. And so what does it say? And in a nutshell, what Giovanni actually found out was when you take as a starting point in time the first Genesis block, which was January 2009, and plot now the time on the x-axis, and on the y, the price. Now, if you just do it like that, then you see it goes massively up from $1, less than $1, to now $100,000. But what he did is if you now apply the logarithm on both axes, it sort of fits their variance around that. Actually, in statistical terms, very close to a straight line. And that's actually, when you think about that, it's something you see quite often in systems which are highly decentralized, where you have a lot of different actors doing something, and every little actor really does do his little thing. But as a group, actually, they form a wonderful, powerful system. For example, you have all the ants that do little thing, and a little ant knows nothing. But ants build massive infrastructure at the end of the day, and what comes out looks very intelligent. Even, I think we would argue, an ant itself is not that clever. A human person is not that clever, but as a collective, we are very powerful and we are pretty smart. And that's what this whole thing, you have a very decentralized system run by one code, you have something which is self-regulated, decentralized. From that, you can apply now it's technical scale-free. And if something is scale-free, you have power law. And that's what you see here. And power law, pretty much, to give a very concrete example, you see it even in biology. For example, how much food would we have to eat every day to stay alive? And as humans, we have to eat roughly 2,000 calories every day to stay alive. And how much does a little ant has to eat, a little bacterium, and a dog, a horse, and maybe a blue whale. Now, again, if you do it on the amount of calorie they need to survive, daily calorie, and their weight and their size, and you do the log, it's a straight line. Yeah. So you find that it's because we look totally different from actually a blue whale. Somehow we are built our cells built in a very decentralized way to create us as humans. And our whales, thanks to their DNA that comes out of the whale. And I think that's the powerful thing. And when you do that, I would say, and it's my biggest take on Bitcoin. Bitcoin actually allows you to apply proper science. And that's very powerful, because I said early on, we as Europeans and the Western world, we went to the period of enlightenment and really created a lot of wealth, a lot of culture, a lot of wisdom in a Western world. A bit later than the Greek did and the Chinese did, but a bit later. But we had a wonderful time thanks to science and wisdom. And I think that we have here a financial product which is not just a separation from state and money. It separates state and money. Now, where you even can apply hardcore physics and math. That's really a powerful message. Therefore, I say, you might see it on my X once in a while. I think the power law, in my view, is the best argument for Bitcoin.
Yeah. I think there's different ways that we could also go when talking about this. I think so. I have by the way, for people listening, I have a 3-hour podcast with Giovanni where I think I say 4 things and he just talks for 3 hours to explain it. That's on my channel, and also episodes with Stephen Perrineau, who's an astrophysicist, with a guy called Sminston, who also or Plan C. So I have a few of those. And what you said, I think, is a good illustration, right? I just Googled it. This is called Kleiber's law.
Yeah, Max Kleiber.
Which is the power law that you talked about, that an animal's basal metabolic rate, like the BMR, scales to 3/4 power of its body mass. So it's not that if a whale is like 100 times bigger than a human, right, that it also needs 100 times more calories. It just scales to its body weight. So it's indifferent from the proportionate differences between the human and the whale, right? It's about the animal itself. And so when I found this, also when I found the power law and Giovanni, I thought like, wow, like how is that even possible, right? Because how can something that is created by a human kind of show this nature type mathematical principle, right? Like, because you find it a lot in nature. And so I sometimes have said like Bitcoin is engineered truth, like the ledger of Bitcoin is the truth of this system, right? And it's engineered to be that immutable data set, basically, and it's organically growing by whatever people are doing, right? So that's kind of like outside of being anything engineered, that is just organic. But because the truth is not only immutable, but it's also secured. Well, it's secured in a way that it stays immutable. That actually becomes the seed for this power law thing, I would say, because the base information in this network is immutable. Does that make sense? Like only then you can kind of like derive anything from that, right? Same as like the behavior of the ants is immutable, or the behavior of the monkeys is immutable, right? Or the size of a whale in a certain way is immutable, because that is just came from a very long evolution, and eventually this is the whale. Does that make sense? Yeah. You know, that's kind of how I think about it.
The whale, actually, when you think every time a block is being mined, you have pretty much the algorithm, which is almost like that's the DNA, that always like that's the protocol
that's just how it works. Yeah, exactly.
Like, that's how it works.
Yeah. Yes.
So that I think is absolutely happening. But now you have different miners, you have the nodes, you have the investors. So everybody is doing his own little thing. And you make a very fair, interesting point, Bram. Power law, you don't just only see in biology. You see even in socioeconomic system like cities. Again, why? Because all this thousands or millions of people, everybody is going about its own business, does its own thing, and there are good people, there are crooks, and everybody tries to come ahead, and like one guy wants to sell stuff to another, and you build this wonderful thing called a magical, wonderful city. And I think that's what you see here with Bitcoin, where you just built this very powerful city called Bitcoin City, this massive system where more and more people are actually getting involved, and which is secured by massive energy. Which either way, that's not a bug, that's a feature, very important feature, and I like it. More the better. And I think right now the energy usage, I think Holland, I think last time I checked, I think it's equal to the energy usage of Holland, I think now, what Bitcoin uses every year. So it's quite a lot. And it keeps growing. Again, it makes it more robust. You have this one code. You have a highly decentralized system. And therefore, just on a high level, you expect if something is highly decentralized, it's supposed to be scale-free. And if it's scale-free, it implies power law.
Yeah.
So, and I like that. I don't even have to. Therefore, now when I've read it, I've seen it from Giovanni, I was like, actually, it's not surprising. Now, I didn't come up with the idea. He did. But you actually should expect it.
Yeah, it's actually a pro argument, I would say, for whatever Bitcoin is. You don't really even have to understand Bitcoin when you come across this, right? Again, this is if you have a different background or different point of view and you just see this, I again think that this should be a signal for someone to become curious about it, right? Because why would something that is a scam or pyramid scheme or Ponzi scheme or whatever, why would it show this behavior, right? And so, like you said in the beginning, this is about first principle thinking in the sense that, okay, if I just shut off what I think of Bitcoin and just look at this objectively and factually, it's actually asking for my interest and my curiosity to see what is this even about. Can I even disprove it? Right? If you hate Bitcoin, but you're like a math PhD or whatever, and you come across this, like it could be interesting to see, like, okay, is there a way for me to disprove it? Right? And if not, what does that actually mean? Right? Like, and then I think you can get to a more profound level of either interest or curiosity or understanding of why this is such, apparently, I would say, such a special thing that is being created and adopted.
Absolutely. What does it mean? When you assume that Bitcoin really evolves the price, not just the price, you have the adoption rate and the energy usage, but people are, I think, mainly focused on the price. If you just assume it evolves according to the power law, then you can calculate right now here that over the next 20 years, the annualized return of Bitcoin will be around 26, 27, 28% region, 26 to 28%. Warren Buffett did 20%. Yeah. Okay, over 60 years. And Warren Buffett is considered the genius, and he is a true investment genius. He really, over 60 years, since 1964, to outperform the S&P by a factor of 2, not 10%, he made 20%. You are better than Warren Buffett. Not for a very long time, because diminishing return, I don't have to go into that. That's a feature of power law as well. But in the next 20 years, so if I tell people you can do better than the best investor in the world by just owning Bitcoin based on physics.
Yeah.
Is it not beautiful? Yeah. That's beautiful. I think you can stop right there. Well, and of course, people say, oh, you're nuts. But like, no, it's something you expect in a highly decentralized system, and you can look it up. And now we can argue about science. But if you argue about science, then you argue about something which actually is the foundation of our culture for the last 300-400 years. That's our world is based on science and wisdom. Yeah. And if we question that, okay, then we are really in the dystopian world. And I see that, by the way, a lot. But I like that angle so much more. And I think we don't really do necessarily a good job. And Giovanni's great. I happen to know him a bit. And Stephen's great. I know him as well a bit. One extremely sharp people. But somehow we are not doing a good job by talking more about that part, because it's so powerful, actually, to say, first principle, there should be power law, and it does better than Warren Buffett. I can stop right there.
Yeah, I think it actually makes Bitcoin very defensible, or at least the thesis for Bitcoin very defensible, as the people that are anti-Bitcoin don't really have a defensible position by just saying Ponzi scheme, etc., volatile. So, but again, I think that kind of connects to what we talked about. It is just rational truth versus like uninformed, unaware emotions, because people don't even understand what money is, right? Or they don't even want to entertain the thought that the financial system that they participate in is designed against you. And there are literal people like you who play on the other side of the game, right? So it is just that I just think people find that very hard, and that takes a lot of time, and therefore we can take the heat along the way, backed by math and science, to just keep on talking about it.
And I think, but absolutely, this idea backed by math and science is a beautiful and a powerful idea, and it's maybe there could be a situation where there's a mistake in the code and suddenly everything disappears. I'm not saying we always can rule things out. There might be some crazy event. I don't see that, but from what I can see, from what I tested, from higher level first principle, yes, power law applies. And I can always say when people say, it doesn't make, I can stop right there. And the beautiful thing is now, what does power law now mean? It means, to be very concrete for everybody on the show now, without going now into the math and what it means, factor, exponent 6 and something like that. I think Giovanna must have explained that. I tend to explain it in simpler terms, in like a proxy term. Scale-free means that if you double the time since the Genesis block, then your return, the price of Bitcoin, increases by 2 to the power of 6, roughly, a bit less. So 64, that's 2 times 2 times 2, 6 times 64. But in simple terms, it actually means the following. You always should expect a 10 times increase of Bitcoin price, always if 50% of the time is elapsed since the time of Genesis block. So be very concrete. We are now 17 years since the first block has been mined. 50% of 17 years is 8.5 years, let's say 8 to 9 years. So you should expect Bitcoin to be 10 times higher in 8 to 9 years. So roughly 2033, 2034. And now what does it mean in 2030? Or let's say in 2029. So you are 20 years away from 2009, which means it takes 10 years. It's half of 20 is 10, to increase the price of Bitcoin by tenfold. Yeah. That's the idea behind.
So that's why, and this is a great bridge, right? So that's why the power law projection is $1 million in like 2033, 2034. Yeah. I've heard you say before that 1 million Bitcoin is in that sense inevitable, but also that it won't cause chaos, right? Sometimes you see people say that, well, but what is the price of a bread when Bitcoin is a million? I think there's different ways to approach that. Like, I don't know if you know, like the Bitcoin's full potential value, like the overview with the blocks by Jesse Meyer, like how big all the assets are in the world.
Yeah,
like Bitcoin takes a certain percentage from like art or cash or equities or real estate, etc.
I think Michael Saylor does it as well.
Yeah, he uses Jesse's thing. Yeah, it's from Jesse, and I think that you can use to argue that nothing really breaks. It's just value moving into a different asset, so it's moving to Bitcoin, right? So in that sense, you can argue 1 million Bitcoin doesn't cause chaos or break stuff. How do you explain this? Do you do that in the same way, or do you use any or it's just the power law, or do you think about like history and stuff? Because also now we see like Bitcoin is arriving in the US pension system, right? Also in terms of, not only in the ETFs, but Trump is opening up the 401k for Bitcoin, which could also, I think, start a certain shift away from classic assets, equities people use to fill up their basically a personal retirement fund, right? And so this mainstream adoption is growing and growing. Do you think that is also a big factor in saying 1 million Bitcoin doesn't eventually create chaos, because it's just so embedded? It becomes more and more embedded in the traditional financial system that it's just hard to ignore or to destroy or ban.
Absolutely. I think the Fed realized that they cannot destroy Bitcoin anymore. It's just too big. The central banks realized that bad shit, bad mode, but they realized the president of the United States loves crypto, not just Bitcoin. So he's involved in everything which somehow makes his family money. But yes, you have the government, the current government of the US is definitely pro Bitcoin. I think it's more and more embedded in the system. One area where it's missing still, and Michael Saylor hasn't cracked that code either, is the debt market, because he's in the equity market, he's in the convertible market, he's in the preferred equity market, but it's still equity. These are sort of like tiny markets. The real price is in the debt market, and I assume that people will come up now. That comes back to my good old Wall Street days, with structured deals to actually include Bitcoin, like a payout profile in the debt market. And if that's going to happen, I think then it will be huge. But important as well is, and that's always what I say, a power law could serve here a very important purpose. I think it's critical as well, and it will happen, that you have rating agencies are getting involved, that more people are getting involved. I know people are going to hate me now for that. So, Wall Street now takes control. Still 72% is in the hand of retail. So I think I'm not that worried about that part, that it's too controlled by Wall Street. But I think if you have suddenly something like a power law, which you can go to an insurance company, you can go to rating agencies and say, listen, guys, test it, run it yourself, have your smartest people and quants going through, challenge us. Suddenly they say, listen, that makes sense. And if suddenly you cannot do that for equities and any of that, okay, you can say it should be high in 10 years from now. But to say, I have a very good idea what the trajectory of Bitcoin will be, that how you attract the debt market, which I don't really like to have a lot of surprises, which is crazy because they're just sitting on, in my view, often worthless notes. But hey, so I think that's the important part as well, to say it's not really a crazy volatile asset. There's some real, it's backed by real science. Just take your time. Challenge us, do it. And I think we haven't done a good job to open that market. But one thing I say as well to that point, it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, Bitcoin will do whatever Bitcoin does. And interesting, when you go on, I think it's on X, my pinned post shows actually a Reddit, I think it's from Reddit, chart from Bitcoin from 2019. It's based on work done by Giovanni, but done by Harold Berger, a German-American scientist. He did this great work. And what I did, I said, Bitcoin back then was at $7,000-8,000. If you don't change the parameter, don't change anything, what is the implied value today? It would be around 120,000, 125,000. So we went from factor 10, more than 10, over a period of 6-7 years. We couldn't see Trump. We couldn't see the ETFs. We couldn't see Michael Saylor, Bitcoin Treasury Company. These things just happen the way they happen.
Yeah, and I think that's also what people, I think, need to understand. There is not a zero chance of no risk, right? There is a non-zero chance of Bitcoin dying, but eventually, as we talked about, everything is speculation, right? You take certain decisions. You can take the time and study this to hopefully make a conscious decision about what you're doing in terms of storing and growing your wealth, but you have to do that on both sides, right? I think that's kind of the theme of what we are talking about, is saying like, well, if you say like, oh, Bitcoin is risky and volatile, etc., 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 okay, but then make the case for the TradFi system that you're participating in being less of whatever you accuse Bitcoin of, right? And I think that on the Bitcoin side, there is more and more proof that actually substantiates, your decision and my decision to be all in on Bitcoin and not being into the TradFi system, and that is defensible up to a certain point. With yes, also there being a non-zero chance that this experiment. I see Bitcoin as an experiment. It's either zero or it's everything, right? It's the measurement of value, the black hole value, however you want to call it. But I don't really see an end station for Bitcoin where it's like a mid-tier asset that some people have and some people
absolutely.
don't. You don't know what the future looks like.
It's a bit of trade, which we did when I worked there during Subprime crisis against. Oh, they were on the other side, Morgan Stanley. We paid a premium. If it didn't work out, well, it wouldn't have been that great for me. Very likely I would have gotten fired and cracked as well. But the upside was tremendous, life-changing. And that's exactly the way to look towards Bitcoin. And by the way, Bitcoin is less risky. It's much, much, much less risky. So, so you have to pay $110,000 today, or $112,000 today. But the upside is still tremendous, and people forget that to say, "Oh, it's very expensive." There is still you don't find this type of return in the equity market. You have to take crazy risk as well at the end of the day, and you don't know anything about this type of stuff. Then, like, what do I know about Nvidia and Google? And I like these companies, don't get me wrong, and I like shares as well and equities. But what do I know? But here, I think Bitcoin, you can do your own work. Everybody can do his own work. I'm not sitting in the development center and R&D of NVIDIA. And what do I know about chip production? Hardly anything, or maybe nothing. But here, everybody can do his own work, and everybody can do with his own sort of like history and understanding, say, well, that makes sense to me. I'm not saying it has to be a power law. That works very well for me. I think that's a very sensible approach. But other people just got feeling. And actually, my mom would have loved it. To say, well, as a farmer girl, that's sort of like, I like that. These guys cannot really take it from me. It's like yes, you see it. Everybody has his own little thing. And actually, I realized one thing when I talk to people: the higher their education, the more difficult is it to have a proper conversation with them. Actually, it's inverse, and it's inversely correlated to the degree of sophistication. And I'm not even sure it's called sophistication, but you see what I mean? It's like people think, oh, it's so smart, and like, oh, I studied, like, really, and they just believe there's a bit of like jealousy to say, oh, we missed out. And as well as how can that be that this random guy who's like I explained, for example, this product to a friend of mine who's like really regular dude, and he just like he gets immediately went on it, signed up an account and bought Bitcoin. And then you go to people with like PhD, highly sophisticated, can explain apparently everything in order to know nothing. And it's impossible, and you must have seen it as well. It's impossible to actually, I think they have to believe. I have people who think like what happened to me, to Pius, like they're really concerned, like, are you loopy? And I feel like I'm selling drugs to them. No, I feel very comfortable, I think. I think therefore regular people get it, and I think that's another argument why state governments, central banks are actually scared, because regular people with regular jobs and a commonsensical approach to life, they actually understand Bitcoin. My mother would have understood it instinctively.
Well, it is simple and straightforward. And I think when you are highly educated, you do learn to think in a certain way that is beneficial in a certain way, but it also constrains you, right? Like I think that the word or the theme that I found is just curiosity, like just be, and what is, it's funny actually, because for me, that would be the true definition of science. Like science is never finished, right?
Yeah.
Right. You should also be curious about what if I'm wrong? How could I be wrong? Can I prove that I'm actually wrong? And when I do that, maybe I discover something else, right? Like it's an ongoing thing of constant self-questioning, your own findings or questioning other people's findings. And so this is, by the way, another article of Jesse Myers, which is why the yuppie elite dismiss Bitcoin. Do you know that one?
No, actually, I'm gonna write that down and read it after.
Yeah. Why the yuppie elite dismiss Bitcoin. And it is actually, he has this matrix, right, where it's, highly educated or intelligent at least. And it's against high or low trust in institutions or government. And I think that, the other thing attached to that is kind of like, do I want other people to think for me or do I want to think for myself? That's kind of like that, right? Like, so do I outsource this trust? I would say, well, when you outsource trust, you want some sort of receipts back, right? So what do I get back for outsourcing the trust? Or do I make the conscious decision, I have to say, to do my own due diligence, think for myself, and then take a conscious decision of which I would say the risk is more clear because I did all the work to understand why I'm making the decision. Whereas when you make the decision with the outsourced responsibility, the risk is kind of obfuscated, right? Like the subprime mortgages being, having a triple A rating is like, oh yeah, there's another person that rated is triple A, so yeah, must be great. But then, like in the movie, right, Big Short, when you actually go to the homes where people should live, there's no one that's living there, right? So there is no, and so it is that. So when you start thinking for yourself, you also kind of like see the world differently. And I think that is, I sometimes talk about the red pill, blue pill, like the matrix, like just that, right? Like, okay, I think this, then I go check it in the real world. It's not like that. Oh shit. Like now I have an issue, right? Like I have an issue because I cannot ignore what I saw with my eyes or that I learned by doing proper inquiry and reflection and etc. And that really contradicts with everything that I thought before. And that is the kind of like point of decision making. Like, do I stick with this outsourcing to another person where there's a certain risk I cannot identify, or do I choose for myself with a certain risk that I can identify, which is probably scarier to do. The second thing is scarier to do, but it does give you an advantage over all these other people that just follow the other herd because that is safe.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting point about to follow, not to ask question for yourself, because that's actually. I give you a tiny story to that around the subprime price, which actually describes it very well. I was on trading floors, worked very well, and I thought, well, if there were always risk involved, 2002, 3, 4, 5, but I always assume, Bram, if something big happens, major happens, that's exactly the time where these highly paid, powerful people from the corner office, usually in Wall Street, in the corner office is like, that's the big guy with the 7-digit, 8-digit number salary and all that. Mm-hmm. He knows, he's so high up, he doesn't really cannot get bothered with normal things. But then he will jump into action, picks up the phone and makes a call and sort things out. That's a bit of a naive approach. All of us, like, these guys know people who then work together will fix it.
Well, you outsource your thinking. You outsource your thinking.
The subprime crisis hit, and I realized the following. These people were sitting in literally closed corner offices on their own, staring at Bloomberg, seeing the collapse of equity prices, and knew so little compared to what I knew, sitting in the trenches, what really was going on. And that really was my wake-up call as well. That these people are being paid tons of money for knowing very little, if anything. And with the biggest degree from biggest university of the world, I paid a lot of money for that. And that's that part. And the second part for me is all critical thinking. The reason why I studied math was it was my passion. But secondly as well, I didn't come from a fancy home. There was nothing fancy. Little farm. What should I know? But I grew up in a society where it mattered whether when you're a farmer's boy, you're actually really low the chain. It was not really that important. And then like, oh, education is not that important. I loved mathematics because I knew that is a subject independent of my wealth, family, background. If I can answer a question, if I find a proof, it doesn't matter what my socioeconomic background and upbringing looks like. Yeah. Because I've proven it. And the 70-year-old, highly decorated professors who knew everything didn't. And I find that very inspiring. No, I didn't find big things, so unfortunately. But you see, I was intrigued by that. I didn't have to come with like a political opinion. Now I argue with my psychologist, with my philosophy teacher, meaning of that, and he's a bit more eloquent than I am in a debate. No, it's very simple. If you're 16, 17 years old and you can prove something, you are the most important guy at this point in time because you did it, and the 70-year-old guy didn't, who had all his massive career in academia. I love it, and I think that's what Bitcoin here is as well. The people say, "Well, everybody, you can do it for yourself. Everybody can participate here, and it doesn't need authority."
I absolutely love that. It's funny because I wanted to ask you, what would be your advice to your younger self about money, risk, or growth in terms of, this new Bitcoin era. But I think this was the actual answer to that. So yeah, that's amazing. I think it's also a really interesting invitation to kind of like daring to trust yourself. Like when you understand, this is also what my friend Richard Byworth says a lot. Like he has also like 20 plus years experience in finance. Like a lot of people in finance don't even understand finance. They don't understand money, right? And it sounds arrogant to say when you are, when I was walking around in a bank, I also thought that was arrogant to say or think. But then when I saw it, I was like, okay, apparently this is, it looks that not everyone that I look up to actually has, all the knowledge and experience, literally also your story just now. And I think that is an invitation to trust yourself, trust your own thinking, reasoning, reflection, your due diligence, your research. Like you can actually figure this out. And that's also what I think is the beauty of Bitcoin, that it is, like I say a lot, an asymmetric opportunity, like you said, but it's based on publicly available information. Like you can actually figure this out way more than you can figure out stocks, bonds, real estate, all that other stuff that you could use to secure your financial future. Like this is the most transparent thing that you could actually understand. And that is a fascinating thought to me. Like if that would click, maybe we would break the power law. I don't know.
Maybe. I don't think so, but absolutely.
I don't know. It's a joke.
What you said, curiosity is key, independent of age. And one thing which, since I'm a little kid, I was always try to be very curious about stuff. And it doesn't take a lot. And people who know me working in a bank, and somehow even my kids, they say one thing that will characterize who I am, and I've given that to advice to people, is always when I hear something, I see something, which is like even with authority, even when I was a little kid, ask the simple question, is that actually true? It's so basic. Is that actually true? And then you say, how, and you said it a bit earlier, how would I go about it that it makes sense to me? And then you say, oh, well, that's not true what I think, so I have to start over again. But simple always, is that actually true? And everybody should be asking questions, not only about Bitcoin, and have a commonsensical approach, not really studying for years. You don't have to study for years. And for Bitcoin, I think you don't have to study for years and go down a rabbit hole, as a lot of people say. I think just commonsensical approach to say, the system we are working in right now, the financial system, does that actually make sense? Does it actually make sense if the United States debt is at 37 trillion, growing with 7% every year, and the GDP is 2-3%? You say, well, that's going to be an interesting outcome here.
Yeah.
And now, actually, that's where exponential growth kicks in. And then you say, well, I think we have a problem here. And I think that's something, again, everybody can do that simple math and can observe that. So therefore, I always like it to put it to very simple principles to say, look at the debt, look at the growth, and everybody would understand, if I really spend much more than I earn every year, then I only can make it worth if I create something where I convince the other guy what it takes from me is worth anything. And there is this like a very interesting novel, which I think is beautiful. Who is the author? The Naked Emperor. You know, the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah.
Which pretty much, like, everybody's like so intrigued, and it takes a little kid to say, but the king is naked. And I think that's it doesn't take a lot, just like simple thinking.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think that's a great ender to this conversation. I do want to ask you my last question, which is a question that I ask everyone at the end, which is, what is a core belief that you will never let go of?
Actually, the simple question I always raise, is that actually true?
Great. Well, thanks so much for sharing, and thanks so much for your time and your insights. I really hope, I think people would find this very valuable, and let's stay in touch and do it again sometime, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bram. Thanks.
Cheers. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, please like this video if you want to help shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, and subscribe to my channel to stay connected. I hope to see you for a next episode. Bye.